You might be wondering what would make someone leave Tasmania and go back to WA. Well, there's a lot of reasons. Number one, there's more opportunity for work and for education. For another thing, there's fabulous beaches like this one here at Bunbury. And the weather is actually warm enough to want to swim in them. But that's not why my husband and I went to Western Australia. We went there to visit my family. And no, we haven't actually moved back. But it is something that we would seriously consider doing. And I think it's worth talking about. Obviously, our first stop was Bunbury, because that's where most of my family lives, and that's where we were staying. Bunbury is a small regional city in the southwest, and it's about 2 hours south of Perth along the coastline. If you want a Tasmanian reference, it's roughly about the same size as Launceston. On a Sunday, it's a pretty sleepy place, and you can get around quite easily and go to the shops. But quite frankly, why would you go shopping when there's a fabulous beach nearby? Anyway, we decided to check out the museum. Bunbury is a major shipping port and pretty much has been the entire time since it was settled. So it has a very long maritime history, which is reflected in the exhibits that they have at the local museum. Bunbury is definitely somewhere we would consider moving to, first of all because of job opportunities, but mostly because my dad's getting old. And these are the things that you kind of have to think about when you live on the opposite side of the country. But there was a lot more to see of southwest WA, so we hit the road. And what beautiful roads they build in Western Australia. Our first stop was Busselton, even though our final destination would be Nannup. Busselton has the most gorgeous flowering trees lining the main street. And of course, they're very popular with birds and bees. It's a pretty small town, probably not even as big as Stanley, to be honest. But its peaceful country setting and its hippy-dippy bohemian vibe make it a really attractive place for people to live and to explore. And if you do visit Busselton, you should definitely check out the Tinderbox. But the real destination of this particular trip to the southwest was to visit Bridgetown, which is where I grew up. Bridgetown, unsurprisingly, is named after a literal bridge which spans the Blackwood River, and this connects it from the town itself to Manjimup and also Nannup on the other side. During intense years of heavy rain, sometimes the river comes right up to the very bottom of the road, and sometimes it knocks out the bridge completely. But as you can see, the river is pretty calm on this particular day, and served to evoke a number of childhood memories about playing around the water. As for the town itself, it's still pretty small. Definitely bigger than Bailing Up, but probably not as big as Deloraine in Tasmania, and definitely a lot hotter. Next stop, Nannup. Have I mentioned that even the country back roads of Western Australia are actually a lot better than the ones in Tasmania? I mean, my dad was freaking out that we were going to take this road from Bridgetown to Nannup because he's like, oh, it's so steep and windy and dangerous. And we're like, okay. Nannup, of course, hasn't changed very much over the years. It's still the same quaint little village that it always has been. Of course, a lot of the income that they earn there is either farming or tourism, so it was kind of disappointing to find out that the giant wooden clock that used to be there is no longer there. Apparently, it was taken away roughly a month after I saw it back in 2019. And the controversy is that they actually still kept charging people to go up to an empty tower. Luckily, we didn't actually drive all of that way for a clock. We drove to Nannup because it had really good Airbnb accommodation. Specifically, a cute historic cottage right in the middle of town. This place was incredibly comfortable, thankfully with air conditioning because it was a really hot day at the time, and it had this really nice little backyard where the next morning we actually saw a rabbit. The kitchen was really modern and had everything that we needed, everything to cook our own food, which was great because my husband has a lot of dietary requirements, and if we have to eat out somewhere, it's usually incredibly painful. Even though it had all of the modern conveniences that you would hope to have in accommodation, it was actually the non-modern fittings that I was really excited about and the reason why I wanted to stay here. Because this is a Metta's No. 2 stove, and this is such a throwback to my childhood in Bridgetown, because the cottage that we had there had one of these, and that's some of my favourite childhood memories, is just lighting the fire in the kitchen and cooking homemade meals. Of course, we didn't actually cook on the old stove because it was way too hot, and I am not about that life right now. So instead, we cooked a pretty nice meal on the modern stove and got to enjoy the atmosphere. As I mentioned before, it had been a while since I had actually visited my family in WA. It was 2019. And that's one of the downsides of not only living interstate, but also living on an island. In order to go and visit my family, I need to either hop on a plane or get on a boat, and it's a really long trip. So these are the sorts of things that you kind of have to deal with and really think about carefully if you're going to move to somewhere like Tasmania. It's not a simple case of just finding the money to get on a plane. Also, COVID hit during that time. And so my dad hasn't been able to really travel to me either. So it really does make you stop and think. This was less of a fun vacation and more of a soul-searching quest, where we really had to think about what our future looks like. And as much as we loved hanging out in Nannup, it wasn't really our final destination for the day. So we packed up and headed off to Margaret River. Margaret River is a town which is at the centre of so many different things that you can see. So it's an incredibly popular place to not only stay, but also to just visit for the day. It's pretty bustling as far as small country towns go. And in peak tourist season, you will be hard-pressed to find a car park. But the secret that a lot of people don't tell you is that you don't actually have to go to the town itself. You can just visit the wineries, visit the caves, visit the beach, and and you can completely avoid the town. However, if you're someone who needs a hefty dose of civilization, this is one of the few places where you will actually find it. So it could be worth getting accommodation right in the middle of town if that's what you need. Just 10 or 15 minutes drive from the town itself are the legendary beaches. And these are mostly well known by surfers, but definitely not swimmers. It's rough. However, if you're in the area, you should definitely have a look because the scenery is gorgeous. After the beach, we decided to check out Mammoth Cave, which is just one of many caves all along the coastline. There's actually a road that spans pretty much the entire length of the sort of jutting out peninsula side of WA, and it's called Caves Road because literally there are caves the entire way along that road, and you can check out a number of them. This one is Mammoth Cave, and it was called Mammoth Cave because it's actually really huge, not because they found bones in it, except that they did actually find bones in it, and it's the bones of megafauna. So I'll let you enjoy the little walkthrough of Mammoth Cave. If there's one piece of advice that I would give you, it's that getting out is a lot harder than getting in. So if you're not particularly fit, I would recommend going back the way that you came in rather than taking all of the steps to get out again, because there are a lot of them. And after all of that exercise, we definitely needed a drink, which is why the next stop was a winery. As you might imagine, there are a lot of wineries in Margaret River, so you can pretty much take your pick. And one of the easiest ways to see many of them is to just take Caves Road. This particular one is different from the others because it has dogs. And there's nothing I like better with wine and cheese than a very cute puppy. Lenton Bray was a delightful place. It had gourmet food from the local region and their own wines, which were absolutely delicious, and I got a box full. Now, Tasmania also has excellent wineries, but they don't really grow the same sort of grapes, so it's worth checking out different regions just to have different terroir. Now, when we got back to Bunbury, we kind of made the mistake of visiting the Dolphin Centre, which is very impressive from the outside, but unfortunately not that impressive on the inside, and actually kind of depressing when you look at some of the fish, because they don't have huge tanks necessarily. Apparently, according to the centre itself, they're within code or whatever. But some of the animals, including the stingray, for example, were doing a lot of what could be called stereotypy movements. Essentially, they swim around in circles and they don't really look like they have any stimulation. I'm sure they do the best that they can to look after the creatures that they have in their care, but it's one of those things like whenever you visit an aquarium or a zoo of some sort, it's always going to be a bit uncomfortable because it's like, well, these animals are in captivity, it's not their natural environment. The turtles here, for example, they're just being rehabilitated before they get released again. So it's not like they're going to live here permanently, but for some of the residents, they might. And for the amount of money that they charge, which is almost $50 for 2 people, it's probably not worth it. Well, the Bunbury Dolphin Discovery Centre was a bit disappointing. The Busselton foreshore was definitely not, even though it was an absolutely overcast, cloudy day threatening to rain the entire time. It was still fabulous. And of course, we paid the fee to be able to walk along the jetty, which is roughly 2 kilometres long. So if you're going to make the trip, make sure that you've got your walking legs on and a decent pair of shoes. As great as Busselton is, I always associate it with getting stung by a jellyfish when I was a kid. And so I have never really swum at the beach here ever since. And if I was to swim here again, I would definitely do it between the nets. So if you're not familiar with the setup that they have here, basically the foreshore has a section which is cordoned off by nets. And you can swim there without getting stung. Now, if you can't walk the length of the jetty, there is actually a train, but you got to get in pretty quick for tickets because they do sell out. When you get to the end of the jetty, there's actually an underwater observation place that you can pay another ticket to get into. We didn't actually have time for that, so we just walked straight back to the foreshore because we needed to meet some people for lunch. And as I mentioned before, dietary requirements are pretty tricky for my husband, so we had to kind of shop around for places that were able to facilitate and which had vacancies. And we settled on a place which was actually really close to the foreshore, which is called Shelter. Believe it or not, it's a gigantic brewery. Even though it started out as a pretty cloudy day, it actually cleared up just in time for lunch. Most places in WA, when you tell them that you need gluten-free food, they double check if that's celiac, because I don't think they can actually cater for celiac, but they do their best. And in terms of ambience and service, this place was pretty good. As you can imagine, we were really starting to enjoy the WA lifestyle. You know, it's pretty open and warm and sunny and you're less likely to actually get sunburnt because the UV isn't quite as harsh and you're actually more aware of it because it is hot. People naturally tend to spend a lot more time outdoors in WA because the weather allows for it. Even though it's hot, it's a dry heat, and so when you're sweating, it actually has the chance to evaporate, unlike Queensland, where I was living before. So, on our last day in Perth, I had to ask myself the question, is this somewhere that I would actually want to live? Or do I prefer it in Tasmania? And I think the answer is that I would never live in Perth. I mean, I have never lived in Perth. It's a city, and I am not a city person. I was raised in the country. That's where I like to be. It's where I belong. It's one of the main reasons why I moved to Tasmania in the first place, because I had been living in Brisbane and I hated it. So I definitely wouldn't want to move to Perth. But would I move back to country WA? And that's a hard question to answer, because it really depends on a lot of different factors: family, work, etc. At this point in time, Tasmania is where I have put down roots. It's where I've built my life. And it would be incredibly difficult to move away. I think, looking back, that I made a really good choice for myself. And I think I'm where I'm supposed to be. So, I don't know about you, but I think I'm happy where I am. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I will see you for Tasmanian adventures next time.